That was the darkest time in my life. One of the earliest and best leadership lessons I learned was being under an extremely toxic leader. I mean, up to my life, I'm engaged, I'm all this kind of stuff, and all of a sudden you're out there. It's like you've been born again into like a new world. Yeah, and I mean, and the war's still going on, right? It's not
And the war going on. It's like, yeah.
I mean, the war didn't end.
Hi, and welcome to Veterans Corner. I'm George Hinestrosa, an Air Force and Army retired veteran of 25 years and business owner for 9 years. Here on the show, we explore how military experience transforms into business success. Each episode features veterans who've built thriving businesses sharing strategies that turn military training into entrepreneurial advantage. The mission is to inspire and equip transitioning service members with practical knowledge and real-world insights from veterans who've built their businesses in many different industries. And today's guest is Joseph Frankie III. Welcome to Veterans Corner, Joseph.
George, I'm glad to be here and look forward to our interaction.
Yes, sir. And I'm honored to have you on the show. So recently, and this will be posted for everyone to see, Frankie was interviewed by the World Times and Trade Flock. Those will be in the description of the video once released. There's an old saying, those who can't do, teach. But what about someone who's done it at the highest levels and then teaches how to surpass even his own achievements? Today, I'm sitting down with someone who embodies a rare combination of experiences, a career that reads like 3 lifetimes packed into one. Joseph Frankie III has commanded 3,000 soldiers in combat support operations across 18 countries per month. He sat on the boards of companies revolutionizing infrastructure and energy storage. He's been in the room literally selecting CEOs, CFOs, and senior vice presidents for Fortune 500 companies and multi-billion-dollar organizations. But here's what makes Joe's story truly unique. Over the past 8 years, he's coached and mentored over 750 executives, veterans, and emerging leaders across 14 countries, ranging in age from 15 to 84. And get this, 4 of his clients have gone on to become CEOs. He's the co-author of the award-winning book, LinkedIn, The 5-Minute Drill for Executive Networking Success, a guide that's helped countless professionals merchandise their talents and land opportunities they never thought possible. He's a LinkedIn thought leader who doesn't just preach about personal branding, he's lived the transformation himself. Pivoting from a 30-year military career into executive search, strategy, consulting, and now coaching leaders through the most critical transition of their professional lives. From the battlefields of Korea to the boardrooms of Houston, from infrastructure projects in China to energy storage solutions shaping our future, Joe has seen what separates those who merely survive career transitions from those who absolutely thrive in them. Again, Joe, welcome to the show. And we could go on forever, but we want to give some substance to our viewers. So here we go. So you've worked with over 750 people at critical crossroads in their careers, Joe. People who are often 40 years old and plus, successful by most measures, but feeling stuck or uncertain about what's next. When someone like that sits across from you for the first time, usually thinking, they just need help with their LinkedIn profile or resume. What's the real problem you discover they're actually facing, and why do so many high achievers struggle to see it for themselves? I mean, what is that?
Well, I think what happens is if we took apart, a telescope, or if you look at the complexity of the way your own eye works, it's just not one thing, right? I mean, there takes a lot of things. And so what happens is people don't realize that all of these lenses, filters, all of that kind of stuff is how they receive information. And what I've found out over time, a lot of times people say, well, I need help. I can't see this, And so what I've learned over time is if you help them negate or set aside or move to the left or move to the right, these lenses that everything's coming through that they're seeing, if you can kind of clear it up for them, what happens is they see their own solution.
Mhm.
So really, it's your subconscious that you're dealing with. And so there's a lot to be said about, you know, hey,
Right.
listen to your inner gut. If you will quiet your mind and listen to your inner gut, I mean, you can get a lot of this done by yourself for yourself. And so what I think I've done is I've just helped people unpack the lenses a little bit so they can get a view of their battlefield, and it's a different view. And I'll give you an example.
Mm.
Um, if we're both looking at a town in a valley, right? So if it's in a valley, there's one terrain feature on one side and another terrain feature on the other. Well, if you're on one side of terrain feature and I'm on the other, if you ask for our complete description of this town, it'd be completely different because we have two different views. Maybe 40% or 30% will be similar, but we're both looking at X, but we have a different view. And I think that's about the most simple way to explain that. You just help people get out of their own filter so that they can see their battlefield. And once they kind of have a clear view of the battlefield, most of them know what to do.
Excellent, excellent. Um, yeah, and I think we covered it while we were chatting the other day. We talked about hindsight, right? And hindsight is great, and maybe we'll talk about that in a second. But I like to focus, and you just mentioned it's like a psychological blockade. There's a psychological filters, and I guess this all has to do with the way either we're brought up or maybe just the experiences in life that may have shaped our points of view. Again, our vantage point, right? You just mentioned that standing on a hilltop or triangulating, standing on three hilltops and being able to see things from different. Um, but when we talk about hindsight, your career, sir, expands, 20, 30 years in the military and then your professional career post-military. And we talk about hindsight, yes, but you had a foresight when you were younger. You were looking forward. You were doing things to shape your future, not looking back and say, well, looking back, I would have done this, I would have done that. We can't do that once we're where we're at. We can only look back and say, well, I wish I would have done this. But you've actually taken some steps to forge your way. Please share just a little bit of that inner dialogue that you may have had even before entering the military.
Well, as far as before entering the military, I think I was blessed by being in a family in a small town, living 3 or 4 miles outside of that town, kind of in an agricultural setting. But the family, we had two businesses, really three. My grandparents started a family restaurant in this town, and then my aunt and uncle had a service station across the street. We lived in an agricultural environment, so you were working harvests and those kind of things. And in fact, I in order to cover that experience on my LinkedIn profile, I created this thing called the Frankie Family Apprenticeship under education. You know,
Nice.
where and I
Life lesson.
yeah, well, I had to do that because one time I was consulting on a project, and so they had a retail food operation as part of this project, but I was consulting on another aspect in this big briefing they were going to put together. So I was helping them on the retail food, and this one guy went over and went to a computer and said, "Hey Joe, we're spending a lot of time here, but you don't have any retail food experience." And I said, "Okay." And he said, "I'm looking at your LinkedIn profile. and you don't have any food operations, but we're spending all this time with you giving us guidance back and forth. And I said, well, I'm really sorry. You're right. It's not on my LinkedIn profile. And the reason it wasn't on my LinkedIn profile is because I grew up in a family restaurant.
Right.
Okay. So this is like, that's
Sure.
before that's high school and
Yeah. Yep.
before. And
Life lessons.
yeah. And so, my grandmother was a taskmaster and the chef she trained, Lily was. And so, I mean, I knew what the temperatures needed to be. I knew the standards of cleanliness. I knew the temperature on how dishes need to be washed, grease traps, all of that kind of stuff with a family restaurant, but it wasn't on my LinkedIn profile. So I created this Frankie family apprenticeship because,
Yeah.
you were trained in all those things and as well as how to run the cash register,
Right.
those kind of things.
So how did your inroads to the military? Did you have a mentor? Did you watch a lot of war movies like I did when I was younger? I mean, what
So my
did
father was a bombardier on B-17s, flew out of England, and
portrait, right?
yeah,
Flying.
B-17 Flying Fortress, and he was a lead bombardier for the group. And so, all his life lessons and experiences, uh, all came back to one of these 10 men, okay? And I mean, if you didn't work together as a crew, you know, you're you were gonna perish. And so, and that's notwithstanding what the enemy is gonna do to you. I mean, it's a big machine and,
Yeah.
it needs to operate effectively. And so, I always had this, thing, this power of a team, a bomber crew, seamlessly working together to, make sure everybody was safe and everything that was going on.
Right.
And, my father took the time and he kept, things out of, Life and Post magazine during the war that he could, flip through and, tell a story. And, I always thought, well, then when I played football, this kinda sounded like a football team. This was like a band of brothers all together.
Right.
And, if that's what the military was like, I definitely wanted the opportunity to experience it. When you first go in, you don't know whether you want a career.
Talk
Yeah.
to us a little bit about that, Joe. Talk to us about where you joined, what you became, first early years of your, 5, 10 years of your military career.
Yeah,
How
so
did that
so I was fortunate enough to get an appointment to the military academy. So a month after high school, I was at West Point, 4 years there, graduated, commissioned in the infantry, and, first assignment, 2nd Armored Division at Fort Hood, learned how to live in the motor pool and work on equipment. There's a lot to, the machinery that goes with an armored uh, division and deployed from Fort Hood twice to Germany. And so learned how to like leave equipment and go accept equipment, all those kind of business logistical operations. And then from there, went to the infantry advanced course, then off to special forces. And, which was a completely different side of the Army, small teams, specialized, that kind of stuff. And then a direct uh, contrast to that, went over and commanded a company in the 82nd Airborne Division. And so that's kind of the first 8 or 9 years of the Army, going from mechanized to individual small section to light airborne soldiers.
Yeah, yeah. So when we come back to your professional life post-military, and I want to reflect back on the military, we talk about leadership. We talk about sometimes even in the military, toxic leadership, or toxic leadership, I guess could be in any environment. As you went through your military life, what in the leadership role that you played and you trained others, obviously if you were in command, you had to lead others. How does that reflect now back on the way you think now on creating leadership and when you are actually in and learning leadership? How can you contrast those a little bit maybe and maybe make it make sense?
Well, you bring up an important point. I think one of the earliest and best leadership lessons I learned was being under an extremely toxic leader,
Mhm.
and it took me years, I mean, 10 or 12 years to say, well, that was the best thing that happened to me. Okay. Because I certainly knew exactly what I didn't want to be
Right.
and what I wasn't going to do. And in this case, I mean, the person was immoral. He was unethical and just a a conscious negative role model of what you didn't want to do. But what it forced me to do is I knew he didn't like me, and I mean I was as sharp as a tack. I mean I looked at any of my reports 3 times over, 6 ways from Sunday, making sure that I didn't accidentally make myself a casualty.
Right. 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 Wow. So now that you say you look back at that, so how about positive leadership? Did you encounter that? Did you have mentors, people that said, "Joe, man, you have this quality,
Yeah.
you should be doing this." What is the opposite of what we just talked about?
Well, the opposite of that, my first company commander was, very helpful. He was a mentor as well as a boss. He tried to look out for the future, and what you learn right away is that you need to be doing this for all your subordinates. In other words, helping them. And uh, in fact, one of the reasons I do what I do today is because I spent a career helping people try to get to their next assignment. Trying to help their portfolio of experience be ready for their next promotion, try to get them competitive for their next school, you know, because if you're not progressing in those
Back
things,
in your career.
yeah, if you're not, then you will be left behind.
Right, right, right. Yeah, no soldier left behind except the ones that don't pay attention to their career progression.
Right.
Right.
You got to
But
take some ownership. At the end of the day, as an individual, you got to own your stuff.
be all you can be. Right. So, going from that, then, so you have that transition, you have that now you are commanding, and you're now in the middle of commanding all these troops across the globe, and you're involved in a multitasking kind of leadership situation. How did all those lessons learned and culminate towards the end of your military career? How did all that come together, and what can maybe comment on uh, the lessons learned from that vast responsibility. Let's just say that because it is a responsibility.
Well, say when you've got soldiers operating in, performing missions in 18 different countries monthly. Some might be a two-man team going to load an Air Force aircraft, in Jordan or, two EOD techs, going somewhere in the Sinai to, dispose of, stuff that they found. Uh, but anyway, you had to trust your subordinate leaders and, because you're responsible, for those people that you're sending out there.
Right.
So from a staff perspective and a leadership perspective, you got to make sure that the planning and the resourcing, work so that they can successfully and safely perform their missions.
Right. Right. Wow. So, did you have? So now, let's say you're transitioning. Now you're getting into transition mode. You've said, "Yeah, I think I've done everything I can do in the military. I've served my country, and I've done pretty much all I can do." At what point before you retired, before the 30 years, did you start thinking, well, what's next for me? What's my transitioning? What's my cue? Am I prepared for this, or is the military all I know?
Um, so I would like to think, as I look back at that time, I thought I had prepared well. Um, I tried to pick up as much education as I could. along the way. And, we've all done it. You're trying to work full time in some cases and pick up extra degrees and that kind of stuff. And so during my military career, I was fortunate enough to, get 3 master's degrees, and so, um, and that's sacrifice because, when you're writing papers, you're not with family, as you well know. Um, and that kind of stuff. So I'm thinking, okay, I'm making myself absolutely as sharp as possible. And it was really hard because when I was getting out of the army, we were deploying people to Afghanistan and Iraq. It was 2004. And so, and I was at the chief of staff of the Army and Air Force Exchange Service in Dallas, and we were deploying individuals, not units. And so, like, I mean, in the PX system, we don't have weapons, we don't have uh, kits and outfits and all that kind of stuff. So, these individuals, I had to put them through a process where, they got all the stuff they needed, they got the training, they got the weapon, all and picked up their NBC stuff. So,
Right.
um, I was really engaged in that activity full up until the day, I signed out.
Okay.
And,
Yeah.
you know, it's, it, there should have been more preparation, about 2 years out.
Right.
Now, so I did go to the classes and, they gave me some really good classes. It's just that my focus was, hey, I'm sending somebody to a combat environment.
Right.
And so I just wasn't done till I wasn't done anymore. I just didn't feel right changing the focus. But what happened is all of a sudden, it's done. Yeah. And like you hit the wall. Yeah. So I was called, I told my wife, I said, at least I have experienced a hostile divorce. And she said, what are you talking about? I said, well, the Army divorced me.
Yeah. Whether I liked it or not.
Yeah. And
So what are some of the feelings that are associated with that, Joseph? And I think we all experience that. We're part of this camaraderie. We're part of this. We feel protected, or we feel at least we're part of something. How does stepping out after so many years, after so much responsibility, you've got to drop it. You've got to drop it, and you have to go on with life.
yeah, and I
How
mean, and the war's still going on, right? It's not
and
like
the war
the war.
going on. It's like, yeah,
I don't mean the war didn't end, and yeah, it was a really big shock. And one of the reasons I do this is because that was the darkest time in my life. I mean, up to my life, I'm engaged, I'm all this kind of stuff, and all of a sudden you're out there. It's like you've been born again into like a new world, and you think you think what to do or how to do it, and then what you find out is you're just in a new world with a new vernacular, and everybody's going to have to learn how to be able to merchandise themselves in words that a hiring manager can comprehend. And
yeah. And contrary to opinion, and it's funny because one of my last interviews, he mentioned this. People don't really care what you did in the service, right? When you come to an employer, they may care. I'm not saying in the sense that in the negative sense they don't care, but it's like, this is a different. You just mentioned that it's a different world. Um, what does what you did back then translate into something? What can you do now, right? How can I use you now? And how did you answer that question to yourself? I mean, what was the way you faced that?
so I faced, to me, it's easier now. And it's easier now because you have LinkedIn. So at least you have a tool that somebody can help you with. Like if you or I read somebody's LinkedIn thing, you would say, okay, you've been out a while, and you've already worked in the reserves. And so you've had to do both. So what is, okay, all right, you said that. what you did in the Air Force, but these people have no clue what that means. I'll give you an example. I was working with a non-commissioned officer that, he was a senior non-commissioned officer in a petroleum transport company. Okay, and so what he was saying, hey, I was in charge of, you know, this, and so uh, he wasn't getting anywhere, and so I said, okay, let's break this down where people can understand it. Okay,
Right.
so you were in charge of 55 5,000-gallon tankers.
Mhm.
Okay, uh, and 55, tractors. That's a fleet.
Yeah,
Okay,
it is.
so then you had
Of combustibles.
yeah, then you had this area that you served. In other words, in this 100,000-mile area, you had 20 customers, right? And you made deliveries so many times a month. And uh, in this 18-month period that you had this responsibility, there was no serious incidents or safety failures. And you maintained an operational readiness rate of the tractors at, 92% and the tankers at 95%. So the military description, the way you would describe that, on an efficiency report is completely different than the way that you would describe it. Because now I say, okay, let's go look up the national stock numbers on this um, tanker and this tractor. And now we've got, multi-million dollars worth of equipment you were responsible for and that you satisfied these customers on a 98% basis. All of that stuff makes direct transfer to the civilian world. But up to that time, he couldn't get an interview. And once he did that, there was people competing for him because they understand what he brought to the table. They weren't going to have to train him on how to, run a fleet, check on drivers, maintain, safety equipment, that kind of stuff because he had the metrics. So it's all about the metrics. Qualitative, that's the story, and quantitative, which is a number.
Right. Very interesting. Yeah. And we talked about that filtering at the beginning. You mentioned that, right? So he had that filter, and then once maybe he understood that, he was able to put it down on paper in a certain way
Right.
where he took those filters off and made it clear to everyone and to himself what he was capable of doing.
Right, because you operated in a language and an
Mm.
understanding of the culture you were in. You're
Right.
transferring to the culture of the private sector, and this is the way the private sector understands things.
Right. Right. So moving forward, Joseph, tell us. So how looking now in hindsight and what you're doing now, you're world renowned, pretty much teacher of leadership. How does that feel? And all of the transitioning service members that we're trying to help at the moment here through this program. Um, what can we tell them now with what we've said? What is the mental uh, acuity needed when transitioning? What should we be thinking of instead of what am I going to do now? Is who am I? What have I learned? And how can I transpose this into a vernacular that is understandable to wherever I'm going, whether it be the corporate world, whether it be another government job, or if they're just going to sell themselves as an entrepreneur? Um, what is the mindset that we need to take?
The mindset that you need to take is, first of all, there's no such thing as a general resume,
Right.
okay? And that I had that problem because, okay, when I got out, I thought, well, there's nothing I can't do, right? Because the military really doesn't care whether you have any experience in something. They just say, hey, we put you in charge. We'll be back.
Yeah.
And you either give them a list of resources you need to solve the problem, and when they're back, you're either good to go or somebody else getting the opportunity.
Right. That's right.
Uh, but in the private sector, I mean, they're really interested in, okay, this particular job. And so if when you write a resume for that particular job, there's nothing general about you. You're answering the mail on what's required in the job description and the position or the position specification. Say there's maybe 5 or 6 things you think you can do. One resume is not going to cut it.
Right.
Okay. And I still have this challenge where everybody thinks you can have this general resume. Well, you can have a bank of information.
Right.
And today, your general resume is your LinkedIn profile.
Right.
I mean, if you look at a resume that you submit today, it's answering every statement on that job description because they're going to run it through a machine
Sure.
or see that it does do that. So you need to do that. Anything else they want to know about you, they'll go to your LinkedIn profile. And on your LinkedIn profile, anything you have on a resume has to be backed up. And so it's just like, okay, if you want to know about George, then you go to George's LinkedIn profile, and his LinkedIn profile is a warehouse. It's a warehouse of everything George B. No do. And from that, every once in a while, a resume truck backs up to the dock, and somebody comes out with a bill of lading that they want from George's LinkedIn profile. And then you take your little forklift and you load all those pallets on the truck. So that means there's got to be direct correlation between a resume that you write. It's a piece that's coming off your LinkedIn profile. If not, you have intentionally under merchandised yourself, and that's a choice.
So we're speaking about LinkedIn, Joseph, and thank you for that answer. And you co-authored or co-authored the book on LinkedIn, the 5 minute drill for executives. Um, how important is that, and how important now that you're speaking and we're speaking about LinkedIn? Because for me, LinkedIn, when I just look at LinkedIn in general, it seems to me just like a place where everyone just, like you said, generalizing themselves, right? But not really the substance of who they are and what they're capable of doing. But so this LinkedIn 5 minute drill that you co-authored, how important is that understanding marketing yourself, not marketing your experiences, let's say, but marketing the true self that you are now, not what you were 20 years ago or what you did 15 years ago or 5 years ago, but keeping that up to date and just revitalizing yourself, really, because when people look at that, they look at what you're doing now and they assume that's you now, but it could have been you 10 years ago.
Right. So, I mean, those of us, you know, LinkedIn came about after we were adults, right? So to properly use it, you have to go back and create and look for data uh, that is in your past. But for the youngsters, I mean, that's a blank slate and, they're writing it, right now. It's an easier job, for me to help my sons than it was for me to help somebody, at our stage in life because you have to, in my view, you have to go back because, uh, everything you be no do, you know, and I've chosen to put that there. And so what happens for me is, for the most part, people come to me, people find me. So I've coached in 15 different countries. I've never advertised. So how did they find me? They ran a search. I came up, they sent a note, then there's some communication. Then, we come to terms and, we work out. Now, one of the things I do want to mention that I don't think it's mentioned enough is when you prepare a resume is really about your IQ. Hey, you've done this, you've done that, right? And with some measured metrics. But it's hard to sell your EQ, your emotional intelligence. And the LinkedIn profile gives you the ability to sell your emotional intelligence. I'll give you an example. Um, so I had the CEO call me one time, and he said, and I like you, George, will say, "Hey, hey, thanks for the call. How can I help you, and how did you find me?" He said, "Joe, I found you on LinkedIn because you're a blood donor." And I'm thinking, well, okay, not sure he wants to. I don't know how I'm going to help him with a blood donor, but okay. What we got to it is, well, I've decided I'm going to do business with blood donors because my daughter requires frequent blood transfusion. And I said, okay. And that's where this was about 10 years ago. And this happened twice on the blood donations. Uh, uh, and I realized, okay, this random thing that I put out there is important to somebody else.
Right.
Okay, so don't let your mind think that you know what's important because you only know this much and the world is, as big as you can put it. So if you've got something out there that you do, like you clean the church once a month or, whatever you volunteer for, and maybe it's teaching Girl Scouts, all that kind of stuff. Another example I had is I was doing executive search one time, and so I was working with the client, and he finally said one day, "Okay, I'm working with this position spec," and I'm saying, "Well, I will take you to lunch. Let me find out, really what you guys want." And so I always do that because at lunch you find out what's not on the piece of paper.
Right. Right.
Uh, And he said, "Joe, really what I need, bring me an Eagle Scout. I can train anybody, but I need somebody with that." Well, okay. Joe's not stupid. I'm going to go find me some Eagle Scouts. And so, brought the next group in, and I made sure 3 out of the 5 had, were Eagle Scouts. And so sure enough, they picked one of those Eagle Scouts. And I was talking to a gentleman that was in the second tier, and he said, "Joe, can you give me any feedback?" And I said, "Well, um, I think they really wanted an Eagle Scout." And he goes, "Well, I'm an Eagle Scout." And I said, "No, you're not." And he said, "Yes, I am an Eagle Scout." And, the Eagles, they got an ID card. And
Right.
so he pulls out, he has his ID card that he's an Eagle Scout and his number and all that kind of stuff. And I said,
Right.
"Look, you might be an Eagle Scout in the past, but you're not an Eagle Scout today." And he said, "What do you mean?" I said, "It's not on your LinkedIn profile.
Oh, yeah.
If it's not on your profile, I can't find you if I'm looking for Eagle Scouts, right?"
Right. Yeah.
So my point is, uh, do use what you be no do and merchandise it. The worst that could happen is nothing,
Nothing. Right.
right?
Yeah.
But you're going to have things happen, if you have it listed out there, just
Mhm.
like I've had,
Sure. Sure. Yeah. So yeah, and that's a great lesson for all of us, right? And I need to go back into LinkedIn myself and update because there's a lot of things I've done in the 10 years since the military that need to be put on there. And again, the busyness of life and all that, sometimes we underestimate the things that are right in front of us, right? The answer, like you said, is right in front of you, and you don't see it. Taking off the blinders is the filters, right? And understanding a couple of things, then you, like you said, you come back to the realization that you really did know the answer, you just weren't applying it, right?
right. In other words, you had a qualification that would have made you competitive,
Right.
but you didn't think it was important.
Yeah.
And so you don't have any idea what's important in somebody else's mind.
Mhm. So Joseph, and in closing here, as we get towards the end of our conversation here, I'd like to just ask, and I ask this almost to everyone, when a man is so busy with family, with work, with his professional life, how does Joseph find time to center himself, to focus, to get spiritual, to have that quiet time? What works for Joseph, right? Everyone has a ritual or some kind of thing that they do that make helps them focus. Some people do it to the detriment of themselves. Some people do it to better themselves. How does it work for Joseph?
What I found is I wish I had done yoga a long time ago, and yoga's helped me a lot. And, and I think the most important thing is it took me about 2 years of, working with yoga to the point where you could actually, quiet your mind enough. And believe it or not, you have the greatest supercomputer, that anybody has. That's your head. But what happens is, the noise of the world blanks it out. And so what I've learned is if you can quiet your mind, and it usually takes some discipline because all of us are not disciplined, and listen to your gut or your inner self or whatever you want to call that, you'll be amazing. Because a lot of times I find people, they want something and, and they're in it. And what they find is, okay, they wanted it, but it's not with their flow, right? Right. I mean, they are just miserable, and because they think that's what they, got to do, and they've got to gut it out. And
Right.
I always say, well, okay, uh, if you're not happy, your health is not,
That's not going to prosper.
yeah, and need to take some time and refigure in it. And
Yeah.
but if it was easy, everybody'd be doing it.
Everybody be doing, yeah. Yeah, I think people don't realize that just thinking something can change the blood chemistry in your system, right? So you can go from and people that are very nervous, tense, anxious can create acute arthritis, for instance, or or they can do. There's things that happen. What happens in the mind eventually manifests itself through the body somehow,
Yeah,
either towards health or if it's negativity and anxiousness could manifest itself towards poor health. Just keeping it simple, right, without diving too deep into that.
yeah. I mean, to me, you wanna what can what can you do to eliminate stress in your life? And it's usually choices.
Right, right. Yeah. So thank you, Joseph, so much. And just as we wrap up here, if you just had a couple of minutes that you had to spend in a room full of transitioning service members, and you wanted to give them 2 or 3 minutes of your hindsight, what would that be?
Well, you're being born in a new world, okay? It's not gonna be like the past. I mean, to me, getting out of the military was going from hero to zero, and you're at the zero in the new culture, and that's okay. You're not the first, you're not the last, and if you will listen 3 times more than you speak, people will help you, they'll show you things and, bring on board. You got to be a sponge, and if you're a sponge and you're respectful of people, most people want to help you be successful.
Mhm. Excellent. Thank you, Joe. Thank you so much. And I'd love to have you on the show again. Maybe we can talk about yoga and get a little bit more into that because
Yeah.
but or not,
Be happy to do so.
meditation is one of the things I do. I do it on a spiritual sense, in a spiritual sense. I work out and I do things like that. That in itself, I think having some kind of physical activity, I do a lot of gardening. Sometimes you can actually meditate while you're gardening, right? So things that take your mind off of the stress in general, right? Generally speaking. Um, but again, thank you so much for being with us today, Joe. And thank you for everything, your thought leadership, your actual leadership, and in your service to our country, and everything that you're still doing. And so that wraps up today's episode of Veterans Corner. A huge thank you to Joe Frankie III for sharing his journey. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share. Join the conversation by sharing your thoughts or experiences in the comments. Until next time, keep pushing forward, stay strong, and remember, you are never alone.
George, thank you. You're a great host, and I appreciate what you do for all of us veterans.
Thank you, Joseph, for those kind words. And again, we're just trying to give back to the community, right? Whatever little or much that we can. Thank you so much, Joseph.